all hiding away during this pandemic, but we're very glad to have you here virtually. The purpose of this event is to hear about the research that our very own Dr. Slocum-Schaffer has done related to civility here in the United States, and some research that she conducted this spring. There is a full report that this research is being drawn from that you can check out. I'll post the link. It was in the email that was sent around to all the faculty, as well as some of the information that I know I personally shared on Brightspace and so forth. I'll post the link to it if you decide you want to pull it up as well for some future reading while you're hanging out by the fireplace, over the weekend, some light reading. This event is sponsored by the Stubblefield Institute Student Advisory Council, of which Peter Proctor and Ali Nazarek are our kind of leadership team. This is a student group that is seeking to advance civility here on campus, as well as in the region, and to advance the mission of the Stubblefield Institute, which seeks to advance civil political communications. If you have questions throughout the event, I believe Dr. Slocum-Schaffer said, just to go ahead and kind of chime in as they come up, and I will be here to try to help out. But other than that, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Slocum-Schaffer, who is again a professor in, I'm going to pronounce the department name correctly, but we will say the Political Sciences and Global Studies.
And Geography, yes.
And Geography department here. So without further ado, thank you very, very much to Dr. Slocum-Schaffer for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you. And thanks all of you for being here, right? Because I know it's crazy time of the semester. So you warm my heart that you're interested enough to be with me today. Also, just wanted to mention that we are recording this event. We're hoping to distribute it through the Stubblefield Institute to interested parties who've already asked if we would record. So if you would prefer not to be on the recording, then I would suggest turning off your video and or not asking a question. All right, so last spring, the Stubblefield Institute for Civil Political Communications sponsored a large-scale national research study that was investigating the relationship between attitudes about civility, and political incivility, and its impact on civic engagement. So I directed the study, and we did a full national survey. We did telephone interviews with 1,001 interviewees. It was a random sample nationwide, all 48 states of the continental US, plus the District of Columbia. We did phone interviews. So they were live interviewers doing the phone interviews, and we had 50% landline and 50% cell lines. So I know some of the students here have been in my research methods class, so you know all about that. The margin of error for the poll ended up being, plus or minus about 3 percentage points. So it was a large scale research study sponsored by the Institute, as I said, and I wrote the survey, and we hired a call center to collect the data. And then I've been working on some analyses. So the report, which Dr. Cushion mentioned, is available, and that's been published through the Institute. But I also just want to say I'm also doing some research with the data of my own that's focusing a little more, a more academic or scholarly kind of approach to this question. So what I thought we'd do today, I want to ask you to take a bit of the poll. So I have a few questions for you to complete. I can't give you the whole thing because it would take about 20 minutes to complete the whole thing. So we just have 6 selected questions that I would like you to complete. And then what we'll do is compare your answers as a group to the national outcome that we had from the research. And in the process, I'll highlight some of the big results that we got, what I think of as the key findings. So here, let me launch this poll. And if you would, please go ahead. I hope you can see it. Can everyone see it? Yes?
This is great.
So go ahead and give your answers.
Um,
Are you guys?
Dr. Sass, on my end, I can't enter. It seems like some people are entering their answers.
C1, should be able to, I don't understand. Should be able to.
I'm able to do it.
Okay. Is any,
Me
are
too.
others? Okay,
Okay,
great.
maybe
Please.
as a co-host, I can't do it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, maybe not, Dr. Cushion. That may be why. We need some background music. While you complete the poll.
Some horrible elevator music. in the
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
I have a question while we wait.
Yes.
You're gonna love my question. What was the response rate?
Oh, Allie,
Good question.
it's an excellent question. And the response rate was right in line with what they're getting nowadays, which is less than 10%.
Lovely.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great question, Allie. You got me. All right, so is everyone finished? Looks like we have, oh no, we have a 13th person doing the poll. Great. So you can imagine what the data file looked like because every single contact was recorded in the data file. And if we had 1,001 actual completed surveys, you can imagine how many people had to be contacted.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought it was going to blow up my computer when I got the initial data file. Yeah.
So you hired a call center system to like ask the questions and do it?
Yeah, so I wrote the survey, I selected the call center. We purchased the list, the randomized lists, so that it would be a random sample through a separate company. Yes, and then we hired a call center to conduct the calls, and then they sent me the raw data files. I think, has everyone participated who wants to? Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. Okay. They sent me the raw data and then I did the analysis. Okay, so let's look at the results. All right, so can you see question 1, the results? We have 0% of you said extremely civil, 0% said fairly civil, 8% said neither, 62% fairly uncivil, and 31% extremely uncivil. So let's compare that to the results from the national survey. going to share the report for you to take a look at. So here's the level of civility. The national results on the level of civility over the last 5 years. So you see, actually, many more people in the national poll felt that things were extremely uncivil. So twice the number of you guys felt that it was extremely uncivil. But together, fairly and extremely is about the same. You know, we're in, you know, the vast majority of people feel that it's either politics in the last 5 years have been either fairly uncivil or extremely uncivil. All right, and I have something else to look at here on the poll. Let's look at question 2. So do you agree or disagree that it's a problem, right? And pretty much everybody either somewhat agrees or disagree or strongly agrees. Am I sharing that? Yeah, there we go. So 85% of you said strongly agree, 15% said somewhat. So how does that compare to the full report? Here are the results for the nationwide survey, right? So again, vast majority strongly agree or somewhat agree, but there's still, you know, 8% of the population who disagree at least somewhat with that result. And then finally, on this section that I want to talk about is this question about political division in the country. So a lot of times folks tend to believe that civility is the same thing as political polarization. And in the literature, we know that that's not the case, right? Concerns about incivility and actions that are uncivil are sometimes, or incivil, are sometimes related to political polarization, divisions across political parties in particular, but they are not the same thing. And so I really wanted to pull apart attitudes about civility and incivility with the attitudes about political polarization. So this was the question that we asked. And let's see, 0 to 33, 8% of you say there's a low level of division, 38% say medium, and 38% say high. And 15% say 100 plus, the highest level, which is the idea that the country is on the edge. Oh, I have to share the results. What? Someone tell me when I don't do that here. There we go. My apologies. That's pretty extreme, right? 15% of you think that the country is on the edge of civil war. Yeah. Okay, so again, let me share the screen, the full report, and look at this question about perceived division in the country. Can everybody see this? Can someone say yes or no so I can hear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's see, not very far off from where you all are. So the low is 8.7 for the national survey, and 8% of you thought the level of division was low. Medium, 28.7% for the national survey, 38% of you guys. And then let's see, do my math, over 50% of you said this high category, and it's a little bit higher among the national survey, right? 2/3 say the level of division in the country is high, and 1 in 10 Americans last March said the highest level possible, on the edge of civil war. So I think that this is the key finding number 1 that we need to talk about, which is that clearly most people see the lack of political civility as a problem. and that they see a lot of political incivility in the country. And they're also concerned about this polarization or division. So thoughts or questions or comments about that before I go on? So the fourth poll question, let me try this again, share results. Can you see it? Yeah, okay, thank you. Question 4. So we wanted to also get a sense of how people feel about the future and whether things would become more civil or not in the future. So we asked this question about thinking ahead. And let's see, 38% of you said less civil, 38% said not change much, and 23% said become more civil. All right, so let's compare this again to the national results. Become less civil, 31% nationwide versus you guys, 38%. Not really change, 38% for you, 45% for the national survey, and become more civil, 23%, about the same. So this I think of as the second key finding, right? Like, not only do many Americans see political civility incivility in the country as being very bad, they also see it as a problem. They also see a lot of division within the country. Many people are not particularly hopeful that things are going to get any better in the near future, right? And so I do think that that's concerning, right? That's a concerning outcome at the national level. That raises questions about the stability of the political system and our ability to move forward, right, as a country. And of course, the national survey was conducted in March of last year. So you're looking at some time after President Trump had left office and there was a new administration in place. I think there was a lot of expectation among political scientists that this concern about incivility would start to fall away. And people would be more hopeful for the future, but that's really not at all, what we see here. So, Matt, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, can I ask a question? I've always
course.
wanted to do that. Students raise their hands sometime in my class. Okay. It combines the last two data points that you talked about. So, you did collect this data, I believe you said in March, about 3 months after January 6th. And so do you think that played a role in people's perception of this notion of moving towards a civil war and things not getting better? And as a follow-up to that, do you think that if you were to take the same exact study today, would those perceptions be lessened, be about the same, just in your own assessment, be sort of less, more, about the same?
Yeah, so we had a lot of discussion about the timing of the survey, right? Because we wanted it to be far enough out from January 6th so that people wouldn't think only about that when they were giving their answers. A lot of discussion about what was the best way to go forward, and we just went ahead and did it. We thought maybe 3 months was enough time, but maybe it wasn't, right? So in all honesty, I think it certainly influenced at least some of the respondents. They had that in their head, of course. In terms of hope for the future, yeah, I mean, you would think that once the new administration was in place and that was sort of behind the country, that maybe people would be a little more hopeful going forward. If we asked today, do I think the results would be different? No, I don't. That's my sort of, I guess, my professional opinion. I don't actually think they'd be any different. So I want to highlight, before I go on to key point number 3, I want to highlight a couple interesting findings that hopefully are a little bit relevant for the students who are in the audience, right? So one of the really interesting findings from the study was that the youngest adults in the survey, Gen Z, 18 to 24-year-olds, were the least likely to view politics as incivil. And they were the most likely to think that things were going to get better in 2021. Yeah. So young people, right, were much more positive. They didn't see nearly as much incivility around them, and they were also much more hopeful that things would get better. So I'm hoping that you guys maybe, can you give us some ideas about what might be going on there?
Maybe they think that, because I mean, I don't agree, but maybe Allie's laughing. Maybe they think that if an angry person who is dividing us isn't in the White House, then things will get better.
Maybe, but why would that be specific about young people? Specifically, what's specifically related to that person's age? Yeah, go ahead, Allie.
I would say young people are more likely to be surrounded by more young people.
Mhm.
So if they're thinking that things are more civil, then maybe this age category and the people that they're interacting with, that's their personal experience. So that could definitely be seen as a positive.
Okay.
Yeah, they might just be around more people who share their beliefs. And so they themselves experience civility with each other.
Although I will say that, you know, as a nation, we tend to associate with people who already think the same that we do. I mean, it's becoming actually we're becoming more sorted. So sorted, not sordid, but maybe sorted too, but we're becoming more sorted. You know, we tend to go to church with and go to work with and live near people who tend to have the same political ideas that we do. And this is part of what's adding to the polarization in the nation. So that's not limited to young people, but if you're surrounded by more positivity, right, then that may influence you. Anna, do you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I also kind of disagree with that point, but I believe that because people did answer like that, it could have been because within the last like 5 or 10 years, we've seen a lot of younger people forcing their way into politics, not really forcing, but pushing their way into politics and making their voices heard. Like especially with like Greta Thunberg and like all of these really young activists. And I think they're kind of seeing that like, oh, if these people are trying to make a change, like something bigger is going to happen. So.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. That's an interesting explanation or possible explanation. I was thinking maybe young people are just kind of used to it. Right? This is your kind of coming of age politically at a time that is fraught with political division and incivility. And so maybe to young people, this just seems normal. There's not a reference point. I don't know. It's just a thought that I had. Does someone else have a hand up? Want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was also gonna mention the narrow frame of reference for younger people as opposed to older people who I guess would see conditions now as worse than what they have experienced throughout their lifetime. So basically what you were saying about reference point.
That's great, Josh. Thank you. Another interesting finding that's also related, and I don't know, maybe this had an influence on your responses, because you guys lined up pretty closely with the national outcome, which I was expecting it to be a little bit more on the positive side, given what we found for the Gen Zers. But I also found that the more educated a person was, the more likely they were to view politics as incivil and see it as a problem. So 63% of those with less than a high school education thought that politics in the country in the last 5 years have been incivil, whereas 91% of those with graduate and professional degrees did, right? So there's a big difference by level of education. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts about why that could, try to get at why that difference might be there. Grace? Looks like you have your hand up. No? Yes? Just jump in there. If you have something to say, go ahead. You don't even have to raise your hand.
I would say that I think people with a higher education level tend to be a little more cynical, and that may be a driver in that.
Okay, that's an interesting idea. What else do we know? Go ahead, Josh.
It could have to do with reference point again, just like knowledge of history as a younger person, not needing the firsthand experience, but learning about historical political conditions and comparing them to, current day.
Mm-hmm. Others with thought. I mean, my poli-sci students, what do you know about the very educated and political engagement and knowledge?
The more politically, the higher education, the more politically engaged you typically are.
Yes. So why might that be reflected about views about how uncivil the politics are?
Possibly because some Gen Zers, I mean, I'm at like the very, oldest section. I'm at like the millennial Gen Z crossover kind of thing. And so people who are really in Gen Z might not necessarily have probably not have a college degree yet, or at least have the college.
Right. Yes, so you guys might be a sort of special subset, right, of what we're talking about here. You are young, but also, in the process of becoming highly educated relative to the rest of the population. So maybe these two forces, are at work in you at the same time. Anyone else with comments?
I was just gonna say, just kind of a personal anecdote, but like, for example, I went to a very small private school, so the population was very overwhelmingly like kids who had gone to private school their whole lives. And I came from, I went to the private school because of my grades, so I like kind of didn't fit in, and I had been very in politics since I was a child, just because of the community that I grew up with. So I've noticed just through social media that as we've gone through college, those same people that I went to high school with, their views have become much more rounded and much more educated than just, hearing their parents say something and then repeating that to their classmates. I noticed that was like a really big thing that was happening.
A big shift that you're noticing. Yes, absolutely. And we have a lot of evidence about that, about political socialization. We have a lot of evidence about the impact of attending college, for sure. And are young people really paying that much attention to politics? Do they even know what the level of incivility is? That's a question. And so the more educated you are, the probably the closer attention, or at least the evidence suggests the closer attention you are paying to the political system. So you just have more knowledge about what the state of politics is. All right, so let's move into the civic engagement part of the study. And so that question 6 that you had to complete for the poll, I know that was an awkward question where you had to count up the number of activities. That, of course, that's not the way the survey was written, which would have been just unwieldy, right? And actually, the original survey, included 13 different possible political activities that you could engage in. And I had to reduce the number because I ran out of characters for this poll. So we're going to get a sense of these. But question number 5 was, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? I am willing to talk politics with others. And so let's see. 31% of the audience said strongly agree. 23% said somewhat agree. So we're in excess of 50% agree that they're willing to talk politics. 23% said neither. And then 23% said somewhat disagree. And then let's take a look at that question 6. Trying to get a sense of civic engagement of members of the audience. So 8% self-reported a low level of civic engagement, 46% medium, and 46% high. You're an impressive group. All right, so let's look at the results from the full survey. All right, so I'm willing to talk politics with others. So 31% of you versus 41% of the national survey said you're very willing. You strongly agree that you're willing to talk politics with others. 23% of you said somewhat agree. So these are not far off from each other, right? And then the strongly disagree, there were none of you who said that you would not at all willing to talk politics with others. And there's 10% versus 23% of you said somewhat. And then on the level of civic engagement, let's see, we had 8% of you were considered low, which is a slightly different number because I didn't give you as many activities to choose from. So 8% versus 12.5%. And then the vast majority in the national survey, 69% were at the medium level of political or civic engagement. And that was 46% of you. And then, as I said, you're an impressive group. 18.5 of the overall group had a high level of engagement, whereas 46% of you guys reported a high level of engagement. So this is what I think of as key finding number 3, right? The third big takeaway from the survey. You know, it's easy to get depressed when you look at the results from the first 2 key takeaways, right? People see a lot of incivility around them. They think the country is very divided and polarized. They think that's a big problem, and they're not very hopeful for the future, right? But the good news here is that people report they're still very willing to engage in discussion about politics, right? So from the Stubblefield Institute's perspective, that's very encouraging news. People are still willing, even with that kind of circumstance, to engage in political discussion. And then secondly, the results suggest that people are still engaged in the political process. They're still very much involved in the political process. Even at a moderate level of engagement is a good number of political activities, right? And so while there is this negative side to the results, there's also a very positive side that I think is hopeful, right? That people haven't given up on the system, right? They haven't given up on the political system, that they're still hopeful on some level that we can have discussions and we can bring around the change that people want. So comments or questions about that? Alonzo, do you have a question or a comment?
Oh, no, I was putting down my hand.
Okay.
Were you able to, I didn't take your survey course yet, so I'm not sure the correct term for this, but sort of the demographics, like geographical.
Yeah, so we did collect demographics. So it was really interesting. You know, the typical factors that I thought would influence, that I anticipated would influence people's attitudes about civility, really didn't pan out. So I thought there would be a big urban-rural divide. I thought there would be a big difference there, and there was none. The literature usually tells us that race has an impact, and there was none in these results. Which was really interesting. You know, it was a nationally representative sample. All 48 states plus the District of Columbia were included in the random sample, but I did not ask a question about or track geography. So the geographical breakdown, I cannot answer that question.
Did you look at political party preference?
Oh, yes. Very good, Dr. DeWitt. So this is a really important mediating factor. Absolutely. So there's two aspects to party ID, and I definitely wanted to talk about this, right? There's how strongly attached you are to the party. So what is the strength of your partisanship? And then there's also, you know, which party do you identify with, right? So Republican, Independent, Democrat, or a third party. So on the civility question, so both of those factors are important variables that explain some of the variation in attitudes and also in engagement. But the pieces that I want to talk about today is that although a majority of all partisans, right, so people who associate with one party or another, Democrats and independents were more likely than Republicans to view politics as uncivil in the last 5 years. And in fact, Democrats and independents were much more likely than Republicans to classify it as extremely incivil.
What about the willingness to like talk politics?
To talk politics. So wait, let me make sure I give you an accurate answer. I think Republicans were slightly more willing. Yes.
Hey, Stephanie,
Yes.
was that question just, are they willing to talk politics, or are they willing to talk politics with someone with an opposing view?
Just, are they willing to talk politics?
Okay, was there any question around like speaking to someone who has an opposing?
No. And that's really a good point, Cindy. Really a good point, right? Yeah. And also the literature is pretty clear about this. People say that they're willing to engage with folks that are on the other side, but the truth of the matter is it's very cognitively challenging to have a conversation with people who don't believe what you do. And so we tend to avoid it. I mean, even very educated people, politically educated people, still choose their news outlets that match up with their political affiliations, because it's just cognitively demanding to be faced with information that doesn't agree with what you already think. So we tend to glom on to information that confirms the beliefs we already have, and we tend to ignore information that's contrary to what we already think. So yeah, that's a great question. So people might say, you know, oh yeah, I'm totally willing to talk to someone with a different view, but in reality, probably not so much. So, and then the other interesting piece was the greatest differences between the different party identifiers was in terms of expectations for the future. So many more Democrats than Republicans believe that politics will become more civil this year. So 39% to 12% think that politics is going to become more civil. So what do we think is going on there? That Democrats and independents were more likely to view the last 5 years as incivil, and also to be much more hopeful going forward. What might explain that? come on, my students. What might explain that?
The election.
Yeah, right. In the last 5 years, most people have whom as a reference point?
Trump.
President Trump, right? And so Democrats were much more likely to say, well, of course, the last 5 years were terribly uncivil. And now you've had an election and there's a president who's a Democrat. So is it really surprising that Democrats think that it's going to magically get better under a new administration? Right. Right. Okay, so tell me what else you think and what questions you have. What other questions you have?
Do you find it interesting that people are still willing to talk politics and believe that there's some kind of civil war or conflict from speaking about politics?
Right. I mean, that's a really good point. And yes, I found it very surprising. I mean, people also give the socially acceptable answer, right? Which I can't control. We can't control when we ask surveys like this. And so, if you ask people, did you vote in the last election? Right? Overwhelming majorities of people say, of course I voted, when actually what they're doing is what? Are they telling the truth?
No.
No, many of them are lying, right? Because the proper socially acceptable answer is, of course, I did my civic duty. Of course, I voted, right? And so I can view this question, Alonzo, like very similarly. Yeah, of course, I'm willing to talk politics with others, like that's what a good citizen does. So whether the answers match up to reality, of course, is one of the big questions about survey research in general. And anybody who's had my research methods class has heard has heard all the disclaimers and all the problems with surveys and polls. Great question. What else?
What to you was the most surprising result that you found? Or were you not really surprised by a lot of the things?
I will be honest, based on the literature and the preparation I did before we did the survey, I actually expected high levels of perceptions of incivility to depress people's political engagement and also their willingness to talk politics. Previous literature, so it's hard to measure, but the previous literature suggests that many people get turned off by all this incivility and they just disengage. They disengage almost completely from the political system. And so I thought we would have a big headline for the Stubblefield Institute, like we have a terrible disaster and we need to work on improving civil conversations so that we can get people back engaged in the political system. And of course, we found the totally opposite thing. The results indicate the more an American views recent politics as incivil, and the more concerned they are about it as a problem, the more politically engaged they were likely to be. So kind of contrary to the hypothesis.
So was there a noticeable difference between age groups on who was more civically engaged and more willing to talk about politics?
Yes, and that's long held understanding in political science. Yes, I mean, the more the older folks get, the more invested they get in the social structure, the more likely they are to do everything from voting to, attending a civic meeting, any of that.
I kind of would have thought that would have been opposite right now, that the older people would have given up and the younger people would, because this is normal to them, would be like, yeah, this is normal. We're just going to engage.
We're just going to do it. Right. That's an interesting observation. The correlation in the raw data is not huge, but I did a regression and I've done a much more sophisticated analysis with the full data set, and age does have an impact. It has an impact. Not as big as I would have expected, but based on
But it-
previous studies, but
It is
there.
still the older
Yes.
population.
Yes.
doing it.
Yes, absolutely. And income is also a huge factor. The higher the income, the higher the level of engagement. Yeah. So if you're interested, I can tell you what the 13 activities were that we tested for. Hopefully I can find it here. Yeah. Being registered to vote, voting, donating money to a political candidate, party, or cause, participating in a protest or demonstration, expressing an interest in politics and elections, contacting an elected official about an issue, being willing to talk politics with others, participating in a civic or religious organization, reading a newspaper regularly, seeking out information about a candidate or issue, volunteering or working for a political campaign or party, attending a meeting or rally for a political candidate, and then displaying a button, yard sign, or bumper sticker for a political candidate. So there were 13 different areas. And again, I selected these based on the literature, on past research indicates that these are the typical components of civic engagement. So.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So I know that there was a lot that you had hoped to include into this study, but when conducting a survey, obviously there's a limited amount of time that people are willing to invest. And obviously there's also costs associated with that. If you were to redo this, in the future, or you could go back in time, knowing what you got out of the data, what is something you wish, just like, I found the answer to this question. I really wish I had asked that other question, which would have illuminated this question. Are there anything like that you kind of sit there and go, oh, I wish I had really.
Yes, yeah.
And
So I think you're raising an important point that I do want to address and just say generally, this was thanks to the Stubblefield Institute, we were able to do this survey. Like, it would not be possible. It was a huge investment. It was a privilege for me to be able to have resources like that to conduct a survey of this kind. I mean, normally, I would never be able to do something as substantial as this project is. So there are definitely trade-offs, right? I mean, even Dr. Cushion had a question that he was hoping we could, add to the survey. And as it was, I had to chop a bunch of stuff. A big amount of the cost is the, obviously the call center and how long the survey takes. You lose respondents the longer the survey gets. So anything over 10 minutes, you start losing the vast majority of people who are willing to participate. So yeah, I mean, I cut huge sections of the survey. There was just no going around it. What would I put back in? So I have a personal interest in questions about political trust. And I think it's related to all of these components. So polarization, party identification, civility and incivility, views of whether those things are a problem are, I think, in my opinion, all associated with levels of political trust. And so if I were going to do it again, I would definitely add my trust questions back in to see what is the relationship among all of these different factors. It just ended up making the decision that polarization, which is a really hot topic in political science right now, was the main one that I kept in, rather than trying to disaggregate or figure out how much of it is about incivility, how much of it is about partisanship and strength of party identification, and how much of it is polarization. And I think I was able to do that. I mean, this research that I've done, this more academic research that I've done is going to be presented in January at a conference. So hopefully eventually it will be published somewhere fantastic. And that'll be good for me, but even more importantly, establish the Stubblefield Institute for the kind of organization that it is.
Well, we only have a few minutes left. Are there any additional comments or questions anyone would like to share? Yeah, Holly.
So you may have said this because I had to take a call twice during this, and I'm so sorry, but is there any relevance about, okay, so you're sitting at home and your phone rings and you just sat down for dinner and you're like, forget it, I don't want to do this. So are there different types of people who go, yeah, I want to answer this? Could that be counted as one of the 13 activities as opposed to somebody who just says,
Right. Good for you, Holly, because that's definitely a factor. I mean, part of the reason why we got such high levels probably of political engagement among those who participated in the survey, if they agreed to participate in a 10-minute survey on political civility and engagement, like they're probably politically and civically engaged. Now, I was able to set demographic targets. I gave the call center very specific demographic targets. So the big one is education level, but also party identification and registration status and gender. So I was able to give these targets, and the call center would go through the initial questions. And if a person didn't meet the demographic target that they still needed to fulfill, they had to toss them out. So the education requirement, we didn't quite make the national target. I used census data to establish the target for the people to be included in the survey. But we got pretty close. And so my thinking is, because we know education level and political engagement are so tightly connected, that by having those education targets, we did get folks that were less engaged, less politically interested at all. But you hit the nail on the head, right? Again, a major problem with these surveys, the kind of people who participate are different from the people who don't.
Yeah.
I tell my students all the time, you're like, what kind of people, when they get a call, who's home in the middle of the day, and who picks up the phone when it's a number they don't recognize, who isn't, that's not screening their calls, and we kind of work through what that means. Yeah. So I did weight the data in an attempt in some cases, and some of my method students are probably laughing at me right now because I've always told them that weighting is a lot of hocus pocus. But I did weight some of the data based on the demographics to try to ameliorate some of those issues.
Well, the only other comment that I want to make really quickly is, I wish I could take one of your classes, Stephanie. You're just so cool.
Oh, thank you, Holly. You just made my day.
So cool. You students are so fortunate.
I also wish I could take one of your classes.
Yeah, Peter.
I'm a poli-sci minor.
Yeah. How did that happen?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Well, we're running up against the hour, so we'll go ahead and close it down. I want to thank Dr. Slocum-Schaffer for taking the time to share her research with us. I know she put a great deal of work into doing this study, and it's a major project for the Institute and for the university. So thank you, Dr. Slocum-Schaffer, for taking the time to share some of her key findings.
And thanks to everybody here. Thank you for being here.
If you are interested in learning more about the Stubblefield Institute, you can Google Stubblefield Institute and find the webpage. If you're interested in the Listen, Learning, Engage initiative, you can contact Cindy Powers. You can find more about on the website. And if you are a student interested in joining the Stubblefield Institute Student Advisory Council, we have Allie, we have Chloe, we have Peter, and we would like to have you. So you can contact any one of us to learn more information. I will drop my email in the chat right now. And if you're interested in trying to kind of impact civility and civic engagement here on campus. So that is everything we have for you today. I hope you didn't make you late to any classes. And if you're in my class, I will see you in 10 minutes. So thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you,
Yes,
guys.
thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All
I need to
right.
turn off this recording.